Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of His Excellency Professor Jamal Sanad al-Suwaidi, Director General of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, we would like to welcome you this evening to a lecture titled The U.S.-UAE Defense and Security Relationship, to be delivered by Mr. Danny Sebright. Mr. Danny Sebright was appointed in June 2008 as the president of the US-UAE Business Council, a key organization building commercial ties and growing business opportunity between the two countries. Previously, Mr. Sebright worked at the geostrategic advisory firm, the Cohen Group, from 2002 to 2016. Prior to this, he served as the Defense Department Director of the Policy Executive Secretariat for the Global War on Terrorism from 2001 to 2002, during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Operation Noble Eagle. Mr. Sebright also served in the Office of the Undersecretary for the Policy at the Department of Defense from 1995 to 2001, advising the Defense Department on the Middle East peace process, regional arms sales, and counter-proliferation initiatives. Mr. Sebright earned a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy of Government in 2001. He earned his BA in International Affairs from the George Washington University in 1984. And now, I would like to welcome Mr. Sebright to deliver his lecture. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Layla Al-Baluchi. I really appreciate the very kind introduction. Thank you to His Excellency Jamal Al-Suwaidi for all that he has done for the U.S.-UAE relationship and all that he has done to promote, obviously, the UAE's great contribution to security and better understanding, better academic understanding of the importance of security and military studies in the region. It's an honor to speak tonight at the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research about a topic that is very important to me and has been central to my career. Some of you know me as the president of the Business Council, and as Layla said, I was also an advisor to Secretary Cohen at the Cohen Group for many years, and I was with the Department of Defense in policy jobs and also at the Defense Intelligence Agency in intelligence jobs. From these various vantage points, I've watched, and I like to believe I've played, at least a very small role in contributing to the blossoming of the close U.S.-UAE defense and intelligence and security relationship over the last several decades. I first started visiting the UAE in the late 80s, started spending a lot of time in the region in the 90s, and now I'm here twice a month in my current position, and I've built up a really wonderful set of relationships across the Emirates. Tonight, I'll provide a brief overview of how this relationship between our two countries has evolved from the first Gulf War to the present time. I'd like to then highlight some of the key facets of our relationship, such as the hosting of U.S. troops in the UAE, joint exercises and training, and the billions of dollars in arms sales that go back and forth and are exchanged between our two countries. And then I'd like to share some thoughts on the future of the relationship. And I can tell you right up front at the start, we were taught at the Pentagon to always try to give the bottom line first, that while our relationship between our two countries is currently strong and solid, I see the potential for very significant changes in our security relationship in the future and the years ahead. And I want to make sure to highlight some of the reasons for that and maybe think about some of the ways that we can try to safeguard and keep the relationship close. Finally, during the question and answer session, and I told Layla earlier that I welcome you pressing me, asking me tough questions, and if I can't answer, or I will tell you so right up front. We won't play any games about that, but I think an honest, open discussion is what's really important. Over the course of the evening, I hope to underscore how incredibly important the defense, intelligence, and security relationship is to both of our countries, and how over the last 2 decades, this bilateral relationship has become deeply institutionalized in both countries, not just in defense and security, but also in economic, cultural, education, and healthcare spheres. Moreover, the U.S.-UAE bilateral relationship today transcends any one administration in Washington, D.C., any one president, any one Congress in Washington, D.C., and it is increasingly based on shared values and mutual commitments. This is key and critical. I like to compare the broad overall relationship to a stool with 3 legs. The first leg consists of our strong political ties, rooted in, as I said, shared values, overlapping worldviews, and mutual interests. The second leg of the stool is the thriving bilateral economic and trade relationship that we have with the UAE, which is marked by over $25 billion in bilateral trade last year alone. And even with current economic conditions, we expect that trade to grow when the new numbers come out for 2019. That trade goes both ways. And although we have a trade surplus, the U.S. holds a trade surplus, the UAE also exports significant amount of goods to the United States, and it also invests in a significant amount of foreign investment, direct investment in the United States. Mubadala Investment Company alone currently has invested over $100 billion in the United States, thinking that this is a very safe bet, very safe place to put its investment. Almost 60% of Mubadala's overseas investments are in the United States. The final leg of this stool, if you will, is the incredibly close defense, intelligence, and security relationship which we began building from the U.S. perspective during my days at the Pentagon before and especially immediately after the Gulf War. This is when the impetus to start growing the relationship really began. Without any of the legs of the stool topples and falls down. And that is why, now more than ever, we cannot afford to take the U.S.-UAE defense intelligence and security relationship for granted. We must continue to work diligently to improve it, to better meet the continuing and new threats that both of our countries will face together in the 21st century. For many years, the UAE and other countries in this region have been consumers of security. They have bought security. The security that the U.S. military, our intelligence services, and security services have provided. Now, however, and especially in the last decade, the UAE has evolved into a country that is a provider of security in the Gulf and the broader region. This is an incredibly significant change and one that will continue to impact our bilateral relationship going forward. Quickly, let me say a few words about, as I said, how the relationship began and the history of it on the military sphere. The current contours of this relationship are rooted in the first Gulf War, and early during the war, the UAE allowed American planes and ships to operate out of its territory. The UAE also carried out airstrikes and participated in the force that liberated Kuwait City. Following the cessation of combat, the U.S. military maintained a presence in the UAE, which hosted the U.S. 763rd Expeditionary Air Refueling Squadron in its mission to enforce the no-fly zone over southern Iraq. In 1994, the UAE and the U.S. initialed a draft defense cooperation agreement that informally provided for U.S. military use of UAE facilities, including at Al Dhafra base in Abu Dhabi and Jebel Ali port in Dubai. Since the first Gulf War, the UAE has partnered in one way or another with the U.S. in every major U.S. military-led coalition. In the early 90s, the UAE responded to an invitation from the Secretary General of the United Nations to provide units for United Nations peacekeeping operations in Somalia. In the late 1990s, the UAE was the only country that committed entirely, voluntarily, to participating in allied operations with the United States in Kosovo. As my good friend General Joe Ralston, who's also lectured here in the past and served as Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as well as Commander of the U.S. European Command and Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, likes to recall, the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, called the U.S. at the time and asked what it could do to help. It offered its assistance and help to the war on Kosovo without being asked. The UAE volunteered to send an Apache helicopter squadron to participate in this mission. This commitment marked the first significant operational deployment of UAE forces outside of the immediate Middle East and Gulf region. In the early 2000s, UAE troops were the only Arab combat force to take part in the mission in Afghanistan, and a 250-person contingent of elite Presidential Guard units and service members have deployed to the country at various times since 2003 to support the overall mission in Afghanistan. And in 2011, the UAE joined with the United States to conduct airstrikes and support the Libyan people to defend against then Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. More recently, in the campaign against Daesh, the UAE military, UAE Air Force conducted more airstrikes against Daesh targets in Syria than any other country from outside from the US during the initial part of the coalition air campaign. I think that's also when you first started flying your first female combat pilot, and this was another really important development. In all, when you take into account the first Gulf War, Somalia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya, and the campaign against Daesh, the UAE holds the distinction of being the only Arab country to participate in 6 coalition actions with the United States. Most importantly, participation by UAE forces in these operations has never been symbolic. The UAE has brought true capability and operational excellence to the fight in every situation, and it has honed its ability to interoperate effectively with U.S. and coalition forces as a result of each one of these operations. In recent years, shared concerns over Iran's regional meddling and the rise of extremism in the region have led to an even further deepening of the defense, intelligence, and security relationship between our two countries. The U.S. and the UAE have jointly endeavored to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and expose Iran's support for regional proxies such as the Houthis in Yemen. At the same time, the U.S. and the UAE have worked together to diminish the threat of al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups through kinetic action, intelligence sharing, and close cooperation in the realms of combating terrorism, financing, countering radical narratives, and securing ports, airports, and other critical infrastructure in the region. As a result of this cooperation, the UAE has foiled terrorist plots directed at U.S. Interests and assets, most notably a 2010 plot by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula to send explosives on cargo planes bound for the U.S. I was here actually on business during the days that happened, and I was so proud that this is how far the relationship had evolved and UAE capability had evolved. Moreover, the UAE, in partnership with U.S. Special Forces, has achieved significant success in halting and reversing the spread of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, in Yemen, driving the group from its strongholds in the southern city of Mukalla and Shabwa province. UAE and U.S. forces coordinate certain maritime patrol and security operations in the Gulf, and the UAE participates in the IMSC, International Security Maritime Security Construct, which is a multilateral initiative led by NAVCENT with the goal of making commercial shipping in and out of the Strait of Hormuz safer. Regarding Iran and the threats it poses to the region today, I want to stop here to tell a quick story about one of the times I had one of the most amazing, fortunate experiences in my life to meet the late, great Sheikh Zayed. May God rest his soul. In 1998, I came with then Secretary of Bill Cohen, William Cohen from the Defense Department, from the Pentagon, and we were here to talk to our Gulf allies about some operations we were about to conduct in Iraq against Saddam Hussein. Sheikh Zayed, we were in Sheikh Zayed's majlis. He sat very attentively on the edge of the couch. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and other sons and advisors were sitting down the row in the majlis. And Sheikh Zayed said, "My dear Mr. Secretary, I'm here to help. We will do what you need. We will do what you ask. But I think you Americans and others don't understand the real threat." And he gestured toward the window and the water outside. And he said, "My dear friend, the real threat is across the water." In 1998, Sheikh Zayed was warning us, was warning our European allies and friends that we had our eye on the wrong ball, that we were worried too much about Saddam Hussein and what was going on in Iraq, and that we should be more focused on how the situation in Iran was developing and how the Iranians were preparing to create the Shia crescent, if you will, across the Middle East. This long history of joint cooperation between our countries provides a strong foundation for today's deep defense and security relationship. The relationship has manifested itself in 3 additional ways over the last 20 years. The stationing of thousands of U.S. ground, naval, and air troops in the UAE, extensive joint military exercises and training, and as I said before, billions of dollars in arms sales. Both the U.S. and the UAE greatly benefit from the United States' ability to station personnel and pre-position equipment in a strategically important location like this country. The U.S. military presence in the UAE deters would-be aggressors and enhances U.S. rapid response capabilities in the event of hostilities. The UAE currently hosts around 5,000 American military personnel, belonging mostly to the U.S. Air Force's 380th Expeditionary Wing, stationed at Al Dhafra Air Base. Moreover, American naval vessels visit Jebel Ali Port every year, and at the port that they visit more than any other port outside of the United States of America. Importantly, the 2 countries formally signed a revised and expanded defense cooperation agreement 2 years ago in 2017 that, among other things, facilitates the continued stationing of U.S. forces in the country and provides the framework for closer cooperation in a plethora of areas. We have also signed enhanced joint agreements on intelligence sharing, information security, technology transfer, and are currently negotiating new agreements covering technology research and development so that we can, with the UAE here on the ground in the UAE, create new IP in the area of the defense and military capability. At the same time, American and Emirati troops regularly train together and conduct joint exercises in order to advance readiness, ensure interoperability, promote information sharing, and build trust. This serves to enhance regional deterrence and is designed to mitigate the risk of regional conflict. About 600 to 800 UAE military personnel travel to the U.S. every year for military training and partnership. They participate in the classes that our military provides, largely through the Foreign Military Sales Program. Since 2009, UAE pilots have regularly participated in our top Air Force exercises like Red Flag training at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. It's considered the best and the most realistic air-to-air combat training exercise in the world. And the UAE has been involved in that exercise for over 15 or 16 years, I believe. In addition, the U.S. and the UAE have engaged in a multitude of bilateral and multilateral military exercises in the U.S. and the UAE throughout the region, including Iron Union, Iron Magic, Eagle Salute, and Native Fury. I mean, just with names like that, you know something really important is going on, right? Over the last decade, the U.S. and the UAE have significantly expanded our joint security cooperation to include joint cooperation in the areas of cyber and missile defense. These 2 relatively new areas of cooperation are very critical and important. And finally, the UAE is one of the largest customers for U.S. foreign military sales, with total FMS agreements with this country projected to amount to over $27 billion. This number does not take into account the growing amount of supplies and equipment that are being purchased on a direct commercial basis, which is sometimes a more preferred way to buy our technology, our equipment, and our services. The UAE Air Force has a fleet, as I think many in this room know, of approximately 74 Lockheed Martin F-16 Block 60 Desert Falcon aircraft, which are considered the most advanced operational F-16s produced so far, with features developed specifically for the UAE Air Force. I was in the Pentagon at the time that we went through the national security exceptions to allow the UAE to have this airplane, to jointly develop it with us, and it was a groundbreaking development that we worked with the UAE to provide a capability that our own Air Force would not even have initially, more advanced than our own Air Force would have. In addition, the UAE has fleets of Boeing AH-64D Apache Longbow attack helicopters, Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, Boeing CH-47 Chinook helicopters, Bell 407 light attack helicopters, and Boeing C-17 Globemaster III airlifters. The UAE is equipped with some of the most sophisticated precision-guided munitions and rockets in the world supplied by Raytheon, and also operates the Predator XP UAVs from General Atomics as a result of the UAE becoming the first non-NATO customer for this drone. In addition, the United Arab Emirates operates not only the Patriot missile defense system, but also the Terminal High-Altitude Defense System known as THAAD, the most sophisticated American anti-ballistic missile system, which is made by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. The UAE notably became the first international customer for this missile defense system about 10 years ago. The UAE operates a wide variety of other U.S. equipment as well, such as American-made mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, supplied by Oshkosh Corporation, and a number of other key U.S. contractors like Northrop Grumman, L3 Harris, Honeywell, and General Electric provide key mission systems and support. Importantly, the stationing of U.S. troops in the UAE, joint military exercises and training, and the sale of U.S. weapon systems to the UAE have all enhanced the personal connections between generations of U.S. and UAE military personnel. This is foundational to the success of the bilateral defense relationship. These personal relationships, these common experiences, the ability to operate and work together. Looking ahead, I think that it's important to pause here and note that the UAE always seeks to lead with diplomacy and the deployment of its soft power. Like the U.S., military force is meant to be a complement to these efforts. Specific examples include recent UAE foreign policy and security initiatives in the Eritrean-Ethiopian conflict, as well as efforts in Sudan, Yemen, and Somalia. Specifically with regard to Iran, the UAE has always pursued diplomacy first, including the JCPOA. The UAE uses foreign aid as a tool and is the largest per capita donor in the world in this regard. Increasingly, the UAE is utilizing its foreign direct investment prowess as one of the largest investors in the Middle East and Africa. Finally, its recent efforts to highlight the importance of religious and social tolerance, the year of tolerance that we've just come through in society, are key to resetting and reshaping the narrative in this part of the world. With this as a background, the outlook for the U.S.-UAE defense security relationship is promising, but it likely will also become more complicated in the years ahead. The U.S. and the UAE share similar worldviews and continue to be bound by common values and interests, such as combating terrorism, countering Iranian meddling, and promoting regional stability, security, and prosperity. Let me reiterate my strong view, however, that the two countries have deep institutional and personal ties that have built over decades and serve as a strong foundation for the cooperation in the future. The two countries remain strong partners that will continue to rely on and need each other for the foreseeable future. But that said, the U.S. and the UAE should not take this relationship for granted. There are significant opportunities for what I call drift in the relationship if both sides do not remain committed to nourishing it and revitalizing it at every level in the process. Two new and interlocking trend lines could ultimately serve to further improve the relationship over time, or they could put it under significant stress. Let me explain. The U.S. electorate, the people, the voters back home, are really war-weary. The call to bring our troops home has been a growing domestic political issue for a number of years and has growing bipartisan support in our country. President Obama long spoke about a pivot to Asia as a central plank of his foreign policy as a way of bringing troops and forces out of the Middle East. President Trump subsequently sought to extricate the U.S. from endless wars in the region, withdrawing troops from Syria at the expense of the Kurdish allies, but with the purpose of bringing American troops home. Current tensions with Iran, however, have resulted in a new surge of U.S. troops to the region, and some American voices increasingly ask why are we constantly drawn back into the problems of this region? Why? Why does America always have to come? Now, to put an intellectual finer point on all of this, key analysts and former national security officials in the United States are adding to the discussion and arguing that the U.S. cannot and should not try to make a difference in the Middle East region any longer. My colleague and former boss as U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Martin Indyk, recently wrote a very, very important and compelling op-ed titled, "The Middle East Isn't Worth It Anymore," and that the U.S. no longer has core security interests in the region. Ambassador Indyk's passionate analysis of what has changed for America in the region is taking what we call the inside the Beltway thought leader crowd by storm. Indyk captures a sentiment and an analysis that increasingly has some resonance on both sides of the political aisle in Washington power circles. Leading Democratic presidential candidates such as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have also advocated for regional disengagement from this part of the world, calling for U.S. forces to refocus resources towards domestic issues instead. The growing chorus of voices calling for U.S. regional disengagement is heard in the Gulf, leading U.S. allies like the UAE to question the U.S. commitment to the region. Will we be here when we really need you? I disagree with Ambassador Indyk's bottom line that the region no longer matters to the U.S. In fact, in some very, very important ways, it matters even more. Our joint struggle to combat terrorism and violent extremism on the global stage must start first in this region. Simply by geography in the region as well, the region is the front line against the threats posed by Iran. The region remains a significant and important market for the U.S. And finally, a key stage in the drama of the great power competition that's unfolding between the U.S. and China is and will be right here in the Middle East. But now let's couple this development in the U.S. with one that I touched on earlier that is playing out here in the UAE and in the region, and specifically in Abu Dhabi. His Highness, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, has been incredibly successful over the last 2 decades in building a credible UAE military force, intelligence apparatus, and domestic security apparatus. It's unparalleled in its capability in the Arab world, but more importantly, is also now able to project UAE power onto the global stage. The UAE has come of age. It has grown up. It has developed world-class capabilities in the security sphere and is increasingly focused on projecting its soft power in the areas of development, reconstruction, and climate change, just to name a few. The country is growing slowly and increasingly self-reliant. Policies aimed at reform and further professionalization of the UAE defense institutions and the Ministry of Defense and Security establishment, and consolidation of UAE defense industry, like, for example, creation of EDGE and the expansion of the UAE private defense industry with companies like IGG, are meant first and foremost to drive efficiencies and create even more professional, capable defense and defense industrial establishment for the future of the UAE's security needs. So the conundrum in the duality of this current situation is that at precisely the moment the U.S. is increasingly preoccupied with possibly drawing down or coming back from the region militarily, the UAE has developed the capability to push forward in pursuing key goals and objectives in the broader region that it has identified as core to its national security interests. Ambassador Ricolta is here. I will say that I've had a number of conversations with a number of former ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors to the region over the last 25 years, and they say things to me like, what's going on in the UAE? It's getting too big for its britches. It thinks it can go do this and it can go do that, and it doesn't come and ask the U.S. for permission. This is how the relationship has evolved in perception from where it was 25 years ago with the U.S. to where it is today. It's very, very important. The rub for both of our countries is that in all of this, the U.S. and the UAE surely still need partners. UAE leaders greatly value the U.S. as their partner of choice, but they are worried that our paths could diverge in the future in important areas. This is one reason, among a number of important other factors, that we see hedging by the UAE and other Gulf countries with regard to the way they are burnishing their relationships with China, with Russia, India, and others, over the one of the relationship that they have with the U.S. As such, in my view, it's time for our leadership in the U.S. to conduct a serious whole-of-government review of American interests in the Middle East region today and for the next decade. We must decide what sort of relationship is it that we really want going forward with our Middle East partners. We must talk with our Middle East partners as we conduct that review, and then we must clearly communicate what the conclusions that we have come to for our own national interests, but also to reassure our partners what will be our role going forward. We must start speaking clearly, bluntly, and without ambiguity about what it is we want and expect, and really, really importantly from my perspective as an American, we must be prepared to listen to what it is the UAE and other allies in the region say they need and want. Finally, one important element of this review must be our policies on technology sharing and equipment sales in the region. The UAE has long had to exercise extraordinary patience with regard to navigating a very laborious U.S. defense acquisition process that is marked by restrictions on the transfer of sensitive technologies, a mandate to maintain Israel's qualitative military edge, or QME, and the very complicated political dynamics of our Congress. These congressional dynamics have only been made all the more complicated by the war in Yemen. Notably, the UAE has sought to be involved in the F-35 program for the better part of a decade. I was still in the Pentagon, actually, when the first questions were coming about the UAE possibly getting a briefing on the F-35. In 2017, there seemed to be indications that the new Trump administration was going to move forward in this regard. However, as of the Dubai Air Show in November 2019, there were no active discussions. This is not the fault of the Trump administration. This is the fault of our Congress looking at what's going on in the region, looking at the war in Yemen, looking at the situation in Qatar as it unfolded, looking at some other things that have happened in the region and saying, wait a second, I'm not so sure we want to be so closely tied to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. This is a real issue that must be dealt with. The same holds true for a host of other key technologies and capabilities beyond the F-35 that the UAE has identified as important for its own self-defense needs. If the UAE cannot acquire from the U.S. capabilities that it has deemed essential, it's only to be expected that Abu Dhabi is going to turn to others, like China or Russia, to provide the necessary tech and kit in the future. Like many other matters, further progress in dealing with a new coming of age, if you will, in the U.S.-UAE defense, security, and intelligence relationship, in some ways has become a bit of a victim of the political infighting in Washington, D.C. You have probably one of the most capable, most intelligent, most successful ambassadors in Washington, D.C., Yusuf Al-Otaiba, and he is relentless, he's tireless in his efforts to go up on the Hill and meet with members and talk to them on both sides of the aisle to try to help them understand what it is you face here in the region today. It's not for not trying that this is the way it is today. This relationship is too important and too vital for American national security interests and as a buttress to successfully meeting the development goals that the UAE has set for itself. We must work together to ensure that the joint defense, intelligence, and security relationship is well positioned to broaden and to grow to our mutual benefit for the next 20 years. Let me end there, and thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and answers. wants to give some answers.
Thank you. And now we open the floor for the questions and answer session. And I kindly ask whoever wants to ask a question or provide a comment to stand up and introduce yourself and make your questions or comments concise in order for other audience to participate as well. Questions, comments? Please.
It's me, Dan. I'm Christopher Hain. I'm a former Homeland Security Senior Middle East Advisor. Now I work in the area, back and forth to the U.S. One of the concerns I always could have, is the threat, as you talk about Sheikh Zayed back then, about the threat with Iran. We just faced an issue with Iran recently, and the bigger threat now is not only cybersecurity, but it's also not so only cybersecurity, but the war, the sense of war. What is assurance that the area could be more comfortable? Because a lot of the questions were asked, is the UAE or the region safe now? Even though just that little turmoil we had with Iran in exchange, what can the US, and you and I both are from the US, can assure the UAE region of a comfort zone? First is there will be no war, and hopefully it will be a peace treaty, as we did yesterday, proposing the Palestinian-Israeli peace, and that's going to be a next event for all of us. But my question really is just mainly on the region, how safe it is, and maybe something you can share with.
Well, first I want to say thank you to Ambassador John Ricolta Jr. for being here today, and I think he has a team of folks from the embassy here as well. So maybe later in the discussion, after, you might talk to them and ask them from their perspective. But my perspective is that the UAE, I like to call the UAE an island of stability in the middle of this mess. This region of instability. And I think that even after what happened with Iran just in the last few weeks still holds true. I think the UAE is probably the safest country in the region today. I don't think the Iranians want a war. I know that you and the Saudis and others don't want a war. We don't want a war. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes dialogue going on. You mentioned a peace agreement. I think President Trump very much would like to get to the point of doing something with Iran that bolsters everyone's security in the region and creates a new dynamic for going forward with Iran. I don't know if we're there yet, but broadly and big picture, I think we've gotten through the recent problems, the recent crisis, if you will, and I think we're at a place right now where things have stabilized again. And I hope it stays there going forward. The U.S. works tirelessly with our Emirati partners, with our Saudi partners, to provide the latest capability, the latest intelligence, the latest sharing. I'm not sure what else we can do right now at this immediate moment, other than what we're already doing, but I can tell you there's a lot of very, very close cooperation.
Another questions or comment?
No more questions? And please.
Please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dani, for your informative lecture. My question is, do you think the lack of consistency in the foreign policy of the U.S. will shake the reliability of the U.S. in the region? To make it clear for you, there's a huge difference in the foreign policy of the Obama administration and the Trump administration. In the Obama administration, they supported what is called the Arab Spring, and mainly I call it the Islamist Spring. And all the instability that we see, whether in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, is due to what we call and what is called the Arab Spring. On the contrary, the Trump administration is completely different. So when we're going to be seeing a consistent and bipartisan agreement in foreign policy in the U.S. related to the Middle East? Thank you.
If I could give you that answer, I could put a lot of money in the bank and make a lot of interest on it. Look, we have a democracy, and our democracy swings back and forth. And with that swing comes different sets of policy priorities and interests. I think one of our biggest problems is we can't keep our eye on the ball on some of the core things. Generally in our history, in our recent history since World War II, we've had a consensus in our country between Democrats and Republicans on what are the core requirements, needs of our foreign policy going forward. That's fraying largely because of what's going on domestically at home, and as I tried to allude to earlier, in our domestic political situation. And I think President Trump and his team are trying their best. I think the Obama team tried their best with their worldview. But I think I said in my remarks, we've got, what's going on in our country has got to be really confusing and cause you guys, everyone out here, a lot of question and doubt about where we're going as a country. I don't know. We have to figure that out. Democracy's messy, and lately in our country, democracy's gotten a lot more messy. But it's also resilient, and I still, as an American, I'm still proud, and I hold up hope that we have the best system in the world, and we're going to figure this out, and we're going to come to some new consensus at some point. I hope we can go down that journey and that road together. Can I ask quickly, how many are students in the room? Just so I get a show of hands. You guys are the future to answer these questions. You all are the ones that really need to come forward with some new solutions and some new ideas to inject into the process. I'll put that challenge back out to you all.
Another question or comment? See, he has a question.
Yeah, cool.
Good evening. My name's James Morse. I'm the president of Rabdan Academy, a university here in Abu Dhabi that specializes in safety, security, and defense. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk, covering a lot of areas. It's sometimes been suggested that the very presence of US forces here in the Middle East actually destabilizes the region because it acts as a focus for opposition to American policies. And in thinking of the strategy going forward for how that might change, there has been talk about actually effectively withdrawing from operational side of things and doing much more in capacity building so that it's regional forces that take the lead in all operations rather than appearing to be American forces imposing dominance in the region. And I was just wondering whether you think that's a credible option for US policy and strategy going forward. Thank you.
Well, it's actually a process that's been ongoing for the last number of years. I was at the IISS forum in Bahrain a few months ago, and the French defense minister stood up very proudly and said, "We're back. We're coming to the region. We're going to be here and be your partner. If the U.S. goes, we'll take over." I mean, effectively, that's what she said. The Trump administration has been working actually very hard to try to get NATO more involved in the region and to try to come up with more of a joint, combined effort to work with our partners here. So I think we could see more of that in the future. It's always been the policy to try to, as I talked about 6 or 7 coalitions, it's always been the policy of our government to try to do things in some sort of a coalition. I've never been a political person in the government. I've always been a career person. So I always did the best job that I could serving, whether it was a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, and I served in a number. And I can tell you, from the Defense Department standpoint, that's always been our preferred way of any military work here, is to do so in coalition with NATO allies, with regional allies, Japan, and Korea.
Please.
متعارف عليه أنه دولة أو الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية دولة حرة وصالحة وتقيم علاقات تحالف مع الدول الصالحة والحرة مثل الإمارات العربية المتحدة. ووجدت أن تحالف الولايات المتحدة مع دولة الإمارات تحالف أخلاقي دستوري فاق كل التصورات وفاق أي تحالف بين الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وبين إسرائيل حتى. ومن هذا أمر طبيعي جدا من ضمن دساتير وأخلاقيات وقوانين دولة الإمارات المتحدة، حتى أن الشعب الإماراتي يتناغم مع دولته في هذا التحالف، وهذا نادرا ما يوجد في الدول الأخرى. لكن من غير الطبيعي أن تتحالف دولة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية مع دول لها علاقات مع دول إرهابية وتحتضن الإرهاب وتؤيد الإرهاب، فهذا غير دستوري وغير قانوني وغير أخلاقي. فما رأيكم بهذا الأمر؟ وشكرا لكم.
It's about Israel? With Israel, the work with Israel. Okay. I think I got your question. Look, I served in Israel for 3 years at our embassy in Tel Aviv, and I have a very, and I spent half my time down in Jerusalem and out on the West Bank, and I think I have a pretty fair estimation of what's going on. I think lately our policy has shifted a little bit, maybe more in one direction, if you will. I've spent a career thinking that the way to make progress in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is for America to be a fair arbiter in the middle. I was at Camp David with President Clinton and Yehuda Barak and Yasser Arafat. The situation has gotten to the point where there's nothing. And I think people in the current Trump administration are trying to do something different. Do I think it's fair? I'm not going to give you that value judgment today. But they're trying to do something different when everything else has failed. And I have worked on this problem my whole career. It's intractable. I feel at this point in my life, having worked on this issue my whole career, I've failed. My career was for nothing. Because we've not been able, America has not been able to help the Israelis and the Palestinians come forward and make some kind of a truce, make some kind of a peace. And the people that suffer are the children and the generations coming. I've been to Gaza Strip many times. I've been to the West Bank many times. And the situation is bad on both sides. And the Palestinians have done unspeakable acts to the Israelis as well. So it's two people locked in this conflict, and how do you break it? And I haven't been able to solve it in my career, and some others are trying something new. That's all I can say. I'm sorry I haven't really answered your question, but that's all I can say.
Thank you. We'll just end it here. And at the end of today's lecture, and on behalf of His Excellency Professor Jamal Sanad al-Suwaidi, we would like to once again thank Mr. Danny Sebright for his lecture, as well as the members of our audience for their participation. So thank you and good night. Thank you.